So what's the secret to creating chemistry with a woman? Whether you're out on a date with her or whether you're just meeting her at a party, you're out at a bar, some sort of social event and you start talking to her, how do you get her to feel that chemistry? How do you get her to feel those butterflies where you can just see that she's feeling it? She wants you to make a move and she makes it easy for you. That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Hi, I'm Bobby Rio, and one of the questions that I always get from my clients is, okay, she agreed to go out on a date with me, but what do I actually talk about with her so that the date actually ends with her feeling attraction and I get a second date, right? Because we've all been on those dates where it just doesn't click. You sit down and the date is pleasant enough, but you can kind of see that there's no chemistry. She's not feeling it, right? A lot of guys think, well, chemistry is this magical, mythical thing and we only experience it with certain people. But the reality is 75% of the chemistry a woman feels towards you comes from what you say to her and how you say it, okay? How you say it is really important. And the first big lesson that I want to get into today is this idea of the chemistry equation and how you as a man are responsible for creating it, okay? So what we talk about when I say chemistry, right? We all have experienced this at some point, hopefully, where you've got this vibe with a woman. Everything is flowing and you can almost feel the electricity coming off of you, right? One of the things that you have to realize is that that vibe that's there, as a man, it's your job to lead her to it. Because one of the things I always say about chemistry is that chemistry happens when you're firmly in the masculine role and she's firmly in the feminine role. And what happens with a lot of guys is we go on a date with a girl, or even we approach a girl at a party, we start talking to her, and we kind of mirror her and we kind of look for her. Is it okay? Is she flirting with me? Oh, she said something flirty. I can say something flirty to her. Oh, she's opening up a little bit. I can open up a little bit. But what you want to keep in mind is masculinity means you want to go first. You want to lead the vibe. You want to create this chemistry equation. I'm going to tell you what the chemistry equation is in a second, but the most important thing about it is you can't wait for it to happen. You can't go like, all right, we were talking and it just didn't happen. It's like you have to mentally go into it and go, okay, she's not going to take charge. And if she does take charge, if she does have to be the one who like flirts with you first and like moves the conversation along, she's not going to feel any chemistry towards you because that's her being in the masculine role. And it's really hard for most women to feel chemistry when they're in that masculine role. So rule number one is you want to take that masculine role. So then the second thing is, well, what am I supposed to be talking about? You say lead her. What does that mean? And that's what we're going to talk about. There's three elements that make up what I call the chemistry equation. I also call it the golden triangle of conversation. And you can kind of use this little triangle diagram here. And the important thing that you'll notice when you look at this is that these arrows mean that it's constantly revolving. What do I mean by that? Well, when I go through them, you're going to see why each element has to constantly be in flux. So the three elements are fun, connection, and intimacy. And the quick definition of them, I'm going to get into them a little bit more specifically in a second, but the quick definition of fun is when you're talking to her and you can kind of feel it, right? You're holding back a smile, she's holding back a smile. It's not like you have to be super funny where you're cracking up laughing, but it's that conversation, those points in the conversation where you're both kind of holding back smiles and talking through smiles, and you can kind of see it, right? It's very visible. Like when two people are having fun together and you look over, you can see it, as opposed to two people who are in like the normal interview mode, serious conversation where it's like, oh, so what do you do for work? Oh, and like, that's not fun. So fun has to be there, right? It has to be there. The next element that has to be there is connection. Connection is not you both talking about how you're fans of the same band or you both went to the same, Mexico vacation last year. That's not connection. Connection is sharing emotional experiences, right? Again, I'm going to get over each of these specifically. I'm going to go over them specifically, but I want to go through them fast because I want to show you a mistake a lot of guys make. The third is intimacy. And the easiest way to describe intimacy is the points in the conversation that you would only be having between two people that are attracted to each other, right? There's gotta be something that goes on in a conversation that you would not have with one of your friends or with your friend's girlfriend, right? If it's something that you would say to your friend's girlfriend, it's not gonna be intimate. So you wanna have those things that you wouldn't say to your friend's girlfriend or you wouldn't say to your boss. There's gotta be those elements of a conversation, those sort of things that cross the line a little bit, right? They're a little edgy, they're a little intimate. You've gotta weave them into the conversation. So when we talk about, I mentioned guys make mistakes, the biggest mistake guys make is that they get stuck in one of these, right? We talk about you always wanna be leading. Well, a mistake guys make is either getting stuck here. Some guys are really good, right? They can make a girl laugh. Well, what happens is they get on a date or they're talking to a girl at a party and they're teasing her and she's laughing and they're having this really, really fun conversation. But then the date ends and they don't get a second date and they're like, what happened? And when she left, she didn't have that intimacy, right? She never felt that sexual attraction towards you because yes, laughing feels good, flirting is fun, but there's gotta be that little extra element there. And if it's not there, she doesn't have that butterflies of arousal. The other thing is connection, right? If you don't connect with her, she kind of forgets about you, right? Because you didn't share anything. If she's not sharing things with you, when she goes away from you later, she's not gonna remember it. Now, on the other hand, some guys are really good at connecting. They can have these conversations where they get the girl opening up and they're opening up to her and it's this great conversation. But again, if you don't mix these other two elements in, you wind up in the friend zone, right? You're like the guy that's nice and she gets along with and she can see as boyfriend potential maybe, but she doesn't have any of that sexual attraction to you, or she just doesn't have any of that flirtatiousness with you. And with intimacy, if all you do is say intimate things with her, even if you can turn her on, even if you're really good at getting a girl turned on fast, later on, she's not gonna have any connection to you. So it's gonna also be really hard to get her out again. This is why the diagram here shows that you always wanna be it's always got to be in flux. You always want to be doing a little of this, a little bit of this, and a little bit of this. And you always want to be conscious of it, right? So let's go through each of these so I can show you what it looks like, what it sounds like, and what it means. Okay, so fun is that playful conversation. Teasing her is an example of fun. So is messing with her, right? If you're talking to a girl and say, oh, so where's your mom? And you're like, oh, my mom just got out of jail. And we had to go pick her up and she's like, are you serious? No, I'm just messing with you, right? Messing with her, that's fun. The kind of things that you do even with your friends, right? That's why I say that fun can look good on the outside, but if you don't mix these other things in, it could just be a friendly thing you do, right? Because we have fun with our friends. But so playfulness, teasing, right? That's all fun when you're playfully teasing her, even playing silly games with her, right? Thumb wrestling her is fun, right? If you're like, I'm the world champion thumb wrestler and you start thumb wrestling her, that's gonna be fun, right? These elements of the conversation need to be there. When we get into connection is sharing an emotional experience. So what this means is that the way that I like to explain it is, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, it matters the experience that's happening if she can relate to it, even if she's never had that experience. So let's just say you guys are talking and she's like, oh yeah, I'm really into eating healthy and working out. And you're like, oh yeah, so am I. But I always have that one night of the week where for whatever reason, it's 2 a.m. and I'm standing by the freezer with Ben & Jerry's eating the whole thing. And I know I should stop, but I just can't stop eating it. I'm like, what? I'm just picturing somebody watching me with the spoon guzzling it into my mouth, right? You're sharing that emotional experience. And even if she's never been there, which she probably has been there, she can relate to it, right? And that's kind of where you want to be when we talk about relating over emotional experiences. It's not relating over topics. It's not going oh, you were in Italy? Oh, I've been there too. I really liked it. Oh yeah, me too. That's not sharing an emotional experience. if sharing an emotional experience could be something like, oh man, the first time that I went to Italy, it was like crazy because I had this like vision, like, you know how when you build something up in your head and you think it's gonna be like so amazing, and then you get there and it's like rainy and people are mean and you're like, so that's an emotional experience, right? Because even if she's never been to Italy, she can relate to that. And you always wanna be like, okay, telling things that she can relate to on an emotional level, not things that she can go, oh yeah, me too, right? It's not about, we both like the same TV shows. That's not what it's about. It's about sharing emotional experiences. And again, I'm gonna go into how you make sure you're doing this. Now, the third thing that you have to be weaving into this conversation is intimacy. Intimacy is, like I said, it's where you're expressing interest. It's where you're showing her that this is not a platonic conversation. It's where you're also doing things that bring physical intimacy and sexuality to the conversation, right? You're bringing a little edginess to the conversation. So some examples of this, one is complimenting her, right? Complimenting her in a way where you wouldn't compliment your friend's girlfriend. So you might say, that perfume that you're wearing is like really driving me crazy. I can't even think right now. It's like I keep smelling it and it's driving me crazy, right? That's something you wouldn't say to a girl that you aren't attracted to. It could be sort of a cheeky, teasing thing that you say to her where you go, hey, if she's like making fun of you and you say, hey, if like you keep that up, I'm gonna have to spank you, right? You're not gonna say that to your boss. You're not gonna go, I'm gonna spank you to your female boss, right? It's inappropriate, but in the context of an intimate conversation, you might say something like that. Intimacy is also when you consciously slow down the vibe, you get closer to her. You're more conscious of touching her hand as you talk. You're conscious of holding eye contact a little bit longer. That's you bringing intimacy into the conversation. And as I mentioned earlier, the important thing to remember is that you're, as the man, responsible, and you want to always be leading, okay? Again, this diagram, you're always moving it around. You're always leading because you bring intimacy into it, right? You spark it. You're on a date and you make a comment like that. You don't just continue bombarding her with intimate, sort of edgy comments. You then go back to a little bit more connection or a little bit more fun. You're moving her around, but you want to be conscious. Did I do all of it, right? So how are you going to be conscious of this, right? This is the meat of this video. Is I want to show you something that I recommend to my clients, something that is going to make your life easier. So the way you want to look at it is you have the fun bucket, the connection bucket, and the intimacy bucket, okay? And my friend Johnson and I, when guys struggle with this, right? Because there's some guys it's sort of natural and they can just talk and they just know how to do this. Other guys, their mind goes blank or they get in front of the girl and they can't and they get stuck in like boring, nice guy interview mode and they don't know how to do this. So a trick that I teach guys is to kind of prep yourself with things that fit into these buckets. And what fits into them, right, is maybe like teasing, right? So teasing a girl is fun. So what I'll do, and things that I'll tell clients is like, okay, think of different things that you can tease a woman on and come up with some lines that you can use. So an example, some fun ones, right, is I might say to a girl, like, you spend a lot of time in the library, don't you, right? If she's like talking and she says something that's kind of like nerdy, I'll be like, I bet when you were growing up, you spent a lot of time in the library, right? So you come up with like, it's banter lines almost, okay? And you come up with a handful of these things, and you also think, okay, what are things that you're gonna tease a woman on, right? And you wanna tease women on things that they aren't gonna get offended by, right? You're never gonna tease her on her looks, you're never gonna tease her on her weight, you're never gonna tease her on her career choice. You tease her on the way she's acting, okay? So like I always go, if she's acting naive, if she's acting bossy, if she's acting like a blonde, a dumb blonde, I might be like, oh, you're secretly a blonde girl, right? If she's brunette and she's like acting airheaded, right? I might say something like that, right? So you want to kind of prep ahead with the kind of things that fit into that. So you're aware of it. Then when it comes to like connection, you want to have things, and I'm going to show you how to transition because that's like the fourth bucket and that's really important. But when it comes to connection, you want to go, okay, like what are the type of things I can connect with? So I remember back when I was going out and I was single and I was going on a lot of these dates, one of the things that I used to like weave into conversations was my sleepaway camp when I was little, right? And childhood stories are awesome for connection. So I had gone to this like one sleepaway camp that was just like torture. It was like they like shipped in these like Australian guys who just like treated us like they were like drill sergeants. And I was like 7 years old and I had to I remember scrubbing the bathroom with a toothbrush. Like they must have like watched some army movie and felt like they were drill sergeants. And then they came here and they literally just did everything that drill sergeants did to like me when I was like 7 years old. And it was actually a traumatic experience, but now, years later, I can like laugh about it and tell it in a funny way when I'm talking to a girl. So like, if we're talking about something and, it comes up, like that's an example of a story that I know I can like get her emotionally responding to and we can relate over it and connect over it. Other examples of that is things like, her first job, what we want it to be when we grow up, right? There's these topics that that you can bring into a conversation, and I know that I can talk about it. What you can talk about is going to be different. So what I always tell guys is like, what are the things that when you talk about, you're really good at talking about? Like I know when I tell my sleepaway camp stories, right? I know that it's going to get a good response. There's stories that you tell, there's stories like my clients tell that I tell them like, remember that, like be conscious of bringing it in, right? You don't have to feel like a lot of guys think like every date they go on has to be like a completely new experience. But the guys that are doing the best, I learned this from watching Naturals, where I'm like watching a guy and he's hanging out with a girl and I'm listening and he's telling the same story that he told some other girl last week when he was hitting on her. And I'm like, and at the time I was like dumb, right? I didn't get it. And then later when I was like studying this and learning this, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that makes sense. Like if you know a story is good, if you know you're good at telling a certain story and it gets a girl laughing, and like tell that story again. Now, you may not be able to weave that story in, so don't just have one story, have several of them, right? So I work with my clients and I'm like, okay, we need to connect, so like let's come up with some stories for connecting. We need to tease girls, so let's come up with some of that. And then we need intimacy things, right? So intimacy, like an example that I have when I want to bring intimacy in the conversation was like, I called it my painting story, because I used to paint houses and it was like my worst job ever. But and this story works for two reasons. One is because I can like tell the girl about like this job that I had where it was like the worst job ever and I used to like dread it, and I can relate and I can tell it in a way that's sort of humorous. But then I always have this story where I'll transition and I'll go, like, the best day ever though was this day that I was like painting this old woman's closet, this woman, Rhonda, and she used to come in and she'd always walk around in the bathroom. This woman was like 75, but she thought she was like sexy. And one day I'm in her closet and I'm moving something and all of a sudden a bag falls and it's like sex toys. And I'm like picking up like all her like toys, putting them back in the bag, and she like walks in as I've got like her sex toy bag, and it was just this really awkward moment, right? So that story allows me to bring sexuality into the conversation. Now, that story on its own could just be a funny story, right? It doesn't have to be an intimate story, but I use it to bring intimacy into the conversation. So at some point I'll tell that story and then I'll go like, everybody like, what would somebody find in your closet? Like, cause you're like quiet, but like, it's always the quiet ones that have like the biggest bag of sex toys, right? So now you're like joking around with her about sex toys. And that's where you bring into that intimacy, right? So you want to have things that allow you to bring intimacy things into into it. You want to have lines, right? Like John Sin, who I learned a lot from over the years, he had this line where when a girl was saying something that was kind of like, teasing him, he'd go, I could just tell your last boyfriend didn't spank you enough, right? Like, And that line always got like a little bit of an edginess to it. It always kind of changed the dynamic of a conversation. Or he would say something like, you know, you really are a cool girl, and I'm not just saying that because I'm hitting on you, or I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to get in your pants, right? That's another way to bring it in. You're saying like, oh, you're a really cool girl, and I'm not just saying that because I'm hitting on you, or I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to get in your pants. Well, you just told her that you're hitting on her or you're trying to get in her pants, right? So you're bringing sexuality into the conversation. Now, your comfort level of how you do this and what you want to say may not be the same as what I say or what John says, but you want to go through the same process of going, okay, these are the things. These things fit in the different elements of a attractive conversation that sparks chemistry. How can I weave them in? Now, so you have these 3 buckets, but one of the most important things, and where guys mess up, is transitions. Because when we go back to this idea that you are responsible for leading, this means that you have to transition. You have to be thinking, okay, it's time to transition forward. How can I do it? So sometimes transitioning can be simple, right? She's talking, she's telling you about her friend's baby, and yeah, it was like you were listening, but she's going on about it and you're kind of getting tired of it. And you know that like, if you sit there and talk about this all night, nothing is gonna happen between you. So at that point you might just go, hey, like, dude, speaking of babies, like, did you see this? And you just bring up something like vaguely related to babies, right? The other way to do it though is questions. Okay, so let's think about this. See, a lot of guys ask questions because they have nothing else to say. But really, questions are used for 2 reasons: to tease her or to relate to her. Okay, so let's go back. So she's talking about her kid, right? I mean, her friend's kid, her friend's new baby. And you're like, man, I got to transition. So you can ask a question. You can say, oh, so like when you were a little girl, how many babies did you imagine you having? Like were you one of those ones that like thought you were gonna have 1 kid and you were gonna spoil it? Or were you like one of those girls that were like, I'm gonna have 15 kids when I get older, right? And she might go, oh, I was like one of those ones that wanted like 5 kids. And like, and then you can tease her. Really, like, cause like looking at you, you seem like the spoil. I could just picture you like with the little girl, and you're like taking her to get her nails done, and she's like 4 years old, like, and you're just teasing her. She just gave you ammunition, right? So you're asking a question, even a question like if you're talking on a date and the date starts off and she's like, oh my God, I had such a bad day at work today, and now you're like, man, I got to change the subject, and you go, so where did you grow up? Now that question in interview mode would hurt you. But when you're doing it to transition, you go, so where did you grow up? And you know you're either gonna tease her or you're gonna relate to her. So if she's like, oh, I grew up in Westfield. Oh, you did? Oh, so did you ever drive past that like old cat lady's house? That lady, and like, you know, you find something you know she's gonna know. And she's like, oh yeah, I did. I totally remember that. When I was little, we used to go to her house and we'd all like dare each other to go knock on her door. And she'd probably have some similar emotional experience, right? So now you're relating to her. So you always wanna be thinking, if I'm gonna use a question, it's gonna be either to tease her, to relate to her, or to tell a story that I wanna tell, right? So if she's talking, and again, let's say she's complaining about her day at work, and you go, so what was your worst job ever, right? You're asking her a question, and she might go, oh, it was probably when I was like, I was a lifeguard and I get sunburned every day, right? Oh, my worst job ever was when I was painting houses after college, and I used to be covered in paint every day, and it was horrible. But there was this one time where there was this old lady and she walked around in the bathrobe and I found her sex toys, right? You want to tell that story, you can ask her a question that allows you to then tell your story, okay? That's the reason that you always want to be thinking in terms of buckets and transitioning and leading a conversation forward. So if this like is something that you struggle with, like I did, I'm a natural introvert and conversation was like my Achilles heel. I have a class that I do, it's completely free with John Sin, who I mentioned is one of the guys that I learned a ton from. And what we do in this class is we walk you through this idea of creating what we call a stack, okay? A stack is coming up with, this is, if you're the kind of person who needs like, I need to know what to say, this is like what we do. We go, okay, from the opening, from the first minute of talking to her, this is how you're gonna move the conversation forward. First, you're gonna talk about this, then you're gonna bring this into the conversation, then you're gonna bring this into the conversation. If she brings this in, then you're gonna bring this in, okay? So we have this class and it's called 4 Steps to Verbal Game, where we help you develop this class. Again, I mean this stack, this idea of a conversation stack. Again, the class itself is completely free. We're holding it one night this week. I'm gonna put a link below. You can click that on, you can register, like I said, completely free, nothing, you don't have to pay anything to get on this class. And you're gonna learn a ton about everything we talked about, and then word for word examples of how to then structure an entire conversation using this, so that you're always leading things forward and you're bringing all 3 elements of this chemistry equation into a conversation. So if you like this video, hit like, subscribe, and let me know what you want me to cover in my next video.